In the process of making this video, I had a lot of big life changes, and one of them was I was able to make a big move that I'm really happy about. And in that move, I was also able to kind of set up a nice little studio space and make it better for recording. But there's a lot of audio that was recorded before I made that move, and I'll do my best in order to try to repair that audio, but ultimately going back and trying to redo a lot of that audio was going to take a lot of work, and I'm already kind of frustrated with how long it took me to put this video out. So there is going to be a giant jump in audio quality about halfway through this video. I'm really sorry, but hey, I sound better. That's pretty neat, huh? Yeah? Okay, anyways, I'm sorry this took so long. Let's get into the video. Warhammer 40,000 at this point is a very big fictional universe, and it wears a lot of the inspirations for this universe on its sleeve. Some of these inspirations are much more obvious than others, but just because something is extremely obvious doesn't make the act of analyzing what it may be based off of any less interesting. Taking time to learn about the real-world design inspirations for bits and pieces of the Warhammer 40k universe helps us understand what makes it popular in the first place and why so many people are drawn to different aspects of it. With this in mind, I'd like to make a few videos about the design inspirations of Warhammer 40,000. So without any further introduction, let's jump into it. It seems only appropriate today that I talk about my favorite faction first. My special boys, the army that stole my heart, the faction I always come back to and keep finding interesting. And I think it's pretty obvious who I'm talking about here. I am wearing this whole tech priest outfit. Yeah, you guessed it. We're talking about my favorite boys, the Drukhari. You thought I was going to talk about the Adeptus Mechanicus today because of the tech priest thing. Oh, here I can just make a quick change and yeah, there we go. So the Drukhari, the Drukhari. No, the Dark Eldar. Damn it, copyright laws. The Dark Eldar weren't my first models I ever bought for Warhammer. No, that would be a Tau Crisis suit which got lost to time. But when 2010 rolled around and that sweet new 5th edition codex came out with all those new fantastic models, oh buddy was I sold. And the codex itself was just a work of art. I still have it, and I thumb through it all the time. Codex writer Phil Kelly and designer Jess Goodwin really outdid themselves with this codex. It's a very special book for a lot of people, and the models, even though many are a decade old at this point, still hold up really well. Speaking of Phil and Jess, when the new Dark Eldar redesign came out and their new 5th edition book was being promoted, the two of them came together and spoke in an interview about the new story and design of the Dark Eldar. The way these two talk about the Drukhari is real fun, and there's a whole lot of earnest enthusiasm for this release. You can tell that for both of them it was a labor of love to be put in charge of this army, which really didn't have much of a place in the Warhammer 40,000 universe before the 2010 release. You see, as far as I can tell, back in 1998 in 40k's 3rd edition, when we first got introduced to the Dark Eldar, the best we got for them story-wise was, they're evil elves in space, yo. They got spikes. And gladiator women in bikinis. And, did this mean Chaos Eldar? Or a different breed of evil Eldar? Did they, worship Slaanesh a little bit? Like the Drukhari do in Warhammer Fantasy, or not? What do evil space elves mean? Games Workshop? How do we evil space elf? All the building blocks and characters for the modern Dark Eldar were there, but Phil Kelly and Jess Goodwin took those building blocks and coalesced them into something more distinct than evil space elves. They do evil pirate things. 2010 gave the faction direction and presence in the story of Warhammer 40,000. So when I was listening to that interview with Phil and Jess, there was something that the two of them brought up about inspirations for the Dark Eldar that, I'm going to be honest, I really didn't expect to hear.
You end up with this feeling of kind of the raid happening at midnight and then they have to get back by dawn. Sure. It's another fairy tale reference.
Exactly. We tried to hint at a lot of old story archetypes with these guys. They are like the evil changelings that will replace them,
Yeah, apparently one of the biggest inspirations for the super evil space elves who raid real space and take people back to their dark city were fairies and fairy tales of myth? Huh. Now, I don't really know about you, but as a fan of the Dark Eldar for a decade now, I really didn't associate the sadistic, piratical Dark Eldar with fairies. The Dark Eldar are a vile, evil culture that capture and torture unsuspecting victims from planets in order to use the victims' pain to sustain their souls, and live in a colossal city dimension filled with violent politics and chronic backstabbing disorder. I really don't think Cosmo and Wanda would do very well here, and I really don't want to know what Drukhari Timmy Turner would wish for. I really don't want to know. Aside from the typical cartoon or Disney version of fairies, though, I usually associate fairy creatures with forests of myth, and the Dark Eldar of Kamara aren't a people very attuned with nature, as some other Eldar are. So back to the interview, why do Phil Kelly and Jess Goodwin so strongly associate the look and lore of the Dark Eldar they created with fairy tales? Well, I did a bit of research, and I think that it actually makes a whole lot of sense. The Craftworld Eldar are very much like Tolkien elves in space, and the Exodite Eldar are the Wood Elves in space. But the Dark Eldar are much more like ancient fairies of myth in space, rather than just typical Dark Elves in space. So to make this clear, we need to go back and explore the fairy myths that Phil and Jess were referring to, and how they affect the design of the Drukhari. Some level of fairy myth can be found in cultures all over the world. Much like dragons, fairy is a very loose term in terms of what it can and cannot apply to. Pretty much any sort of magical spirit from any culture could probably be described as a fairy, or at least fairy adjacent. Traditionally, however, fairies are associated with the cultures of European folklore, and even in that folklore, fairy has a wide definition that varied from place to place. In some places, fairies are very much like the fairies we think of, like Tinkerbell, small, magical, beautiful yet mischievous creatures. Sometimes, fairies are demoted angels, demons, or even spirits of the dead. Sometimes, the term is used to describe any magical creature, like goblins. The particular brand of fairy, which we can also call the Fae or the Fair Folk, we need to know about for the Drukhari originates from Scotland, where the magical creatures of folklore could be put into two categories, the Seelie and Unseelie fairy courts. These two fairy courts were not just filled with typical fairy-style creatures. The Celtic fairy encompassed pretty much any magical spirit creature. For example, this little gnome-looking fella, a brownie, is a helper household spirit who will clean things or make messes when you aren't looking, and is considered a fairy. Without butchering too much about ancient Scottish myth, the Seelie courts are what we may think of as the good fairy court. But they weren't really always good per se. A better way to think about them is not malevolent fairies. This is reinforced by the translation of the word Seelie. It roughly translates to happy or lucky or blessed. Fae of the Seelie court were usually much more kind-hearted and willing to help humans, but at heart they were also pranksters. They could be very dangerous if you insulted them or became caught up in one of their pranks, because usually Seelie fairies weren't very concerned with the problems those pranks might cause, and also become very angry when insulted. If you've ever read A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare, Shakespeare's interpretation of the fairies, especially Puck, are of the Seelie court. They want to help the lovers in the play, but also like to cause problems on purpose. The court we're really interested in today, though, is the Unseelie court. The Unseelie court is the opposite of the Seelie court. Where Seelie meant happy or blessed, Unseelie meant unhappy or unblessed. The Unseelie court were actively malicious to humans. They didn't need a reason to attack someone in the night and drag them back to their fairy homes for God knows what. They just did it, and that made them extremely dangerous for the villages around them. Many times, these fairies are similar to ghosts, in the fact that they are created by spirits of the unsanctified dead. For example, the Dolahan, the scary version, yeah, that one. The Dolahan or Headless Horseman is usually seen as a ghost in modern tales, but is actually originally part of the Faerie Unseelie court. Witches and hags, as well as boggarts, and the restless unsanctified dead mentioned above, known as a sloch, I butchered that pronunciation, were often members of the Unseelie court. Phil also mentions changelings in the interview, which is another fairy myth. Changelings nowadays are associated with someone who changes their appearance like a shapeshifter, like we see in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. In fairy myth, the changeling wasn't a shapeshifter. In those stories, a changeling is what happened when a group of fairies snatched away a human baby and replaced the baby with a lookalike, which was then called a changeling. Now, the reason for a baby being snatched could be anything from fun prank to active malice. Oftentimes, though, a changeling was described as a family member who is an active drain on the family welfare or luck, similar to how a family might accuse a daughter of witchcraft, a strange character in the community who could also later be accused of witchcraft, or a seemingly healthy child who suddenly fell ill with an unexplainable disease. Which again, in Salem was probably because of a witch. In modern times, these explanations seem silly. That baby isn't coughing because it was snatched away by fairies and replaced with a changeling. That baby has pneumonia, bro. Take it to a doctor. But changelings and the Unseelie court in general represented something very similar to how Christendom views demons with a more magical twist. They existed to explain how bad luck befell people and the fear of the unknown people had at the time. You may have gotten a strange rash on your body because you were snatched away by Unseelie fairies who placed this curse on you and returned you days later to society with no memory of what happened. It totally wasn't poison ivy, man. And yeah, I know that sounds very similar to how we view alien abductions, because it is very similar to alien abductions. There's a whole lot of parallels there. And with the rise of more grim fairy tales, the Seelie and Unseelie courts are becoming very popular parts of modern fiction. Notably, the Dresden Files series by Jim Butcher has the Seelie and Unseelie courts, also known as the Summer and Winter Court in the books, as major players in the narrative. So how do the Dark Eldar and Unseelie myth parallel? Phil Kelly and Jessica Edwin have stated that the design for the Dark Eldar we have today is very much based on the myth of the Unseelie Fae. Much like the traditional idea of a fairy, the Dark Eldar are graceful and beautiful in appearance, but extremely wicked in their intentions. That they seem like something that many of us would just describe as magic. For example, the Hex Rifle is a weapon found in the Codex, which is the rulebook for the Dark Eldar, and it fires a projectile that turns its target into glass should it connect with the flesh. The Husk Blade carried by some Drukhari leaders known as Archons turn their foes into dust. Another artifact captures you in the reflection of a mirror, and you die horribly when the bearer shatters the mirror your reflection is caught in. The mythical strangeness and cruelty associated with the Unseelie Fae is woven into the strange weaponry of the Drukhari, where this bizarre cruelty is considered a major plus. And the homunculi covens are great examples of what some of the Unseelie witches of fairy myth were like. A homunculus is a strange flesh surgeon. There we go. A homunculus is a strange flesh surgeon. That's a tongue twister. Who make horrible deformed monsters to fight for the Drukhari. And in exchange for their services or aid with these giant horrible monsters, they love to ask for more esoteric items instead of traditional payments. Examples include taking away your ability to laugh, or maybe the tears of an Exodite Eldar, or a frog, I suppose? You know, maybe they want a frog today. It's all a very clear reference to the witch's brew and the strange things that ended up in their concoction. The Drukhari also love making monkey paw style deals with the other races of the galaxy that are reminiscent of the fairy tales and bedtime stories we grew up with. One of my favorite examples of this goes that the Tau receive a transmission from a Drukhari homunculus coven, that they're happy to help the Tau drive off some invading Tyranids if they send some of their people to the homunculus for a totally not evil cultural exchange. Naively, the Tau agree, and send dozens of citizens and warriors of the various Tau castes to the homunculi for, this cultural exchange. One of the Tau commanders is even quoted as saying the whole thing seemed legit. Then, the strange monstrosities of the homunculi come to help the Tau fight off the Tyranid forces from their very highly populated colony planet. As the fighting comes to a close and the Tyranids are ultimately destroyed, the Tau are horrified to realize from some video footage of the thickest of the fighting that many of the new monsters the Drukhari are bringing with them seem to look a whole lot more, blue than the original ones, and get real wise real quick to the fact of what these cultural exchanges actually were. Moments later, the homunculus shows up on every vid capture on the planet to make his evil villain ultimatum. The Tau hand over 7 of their holy ethereal caste, or 777,000 of any other Tau citizen. The Tau forces defending the planet are incensed by the idea of giving up their holy leaders to the Drukhari. And, also the civilians too, I guess. And they refuse. Then round up their remaining forces to chase down the homunculus to the location of its lair. They find no one there when they arrive, and a transmission comes from the forces left behind that the Drukhari have attacked the entire planet, seemingly from nowhere. By the time the Tau military forces make it back to the planet, the fighting is already done. And every Tau citizen on the planet is missing, stolen away into the darkness by the evil Drukhari. Much like the old fairy tale, the moral of the story goes to always pay the Pied Piper. Kamara, the massive city of the Dark Eldar, also serves as a great analog to the fairy world that fairies reside in. Most fairy myth has something like a Neverland, a magic world exclusively inhabited by fairies and fairy creatures. Usually, the entrance into this place is impossible without some sort of fairy guide. In Disney movies, the fairy world is a magical place where you'll never grow old. In old myth, the fairy world is a deeply alien place that humans aren't really welcome in. At best, they're strangers in a strange land like A Midsummer Night's Dream. At worst, it's an extremely dangerous place that is actively hostile and alien to human life. Kamara falls into the latter. Due to its position in the in-between dimension known as the Webway, it's nigh impossible for non-Eldar to access, much less navigate successfully. And Kamara itself is depicted as an extremely alien place in the official art, with sharp black spires jutting from every direction that defies our human understandings of physics. Kamara even has its own court-like governing body with the Cabals and the High Lord of Kamara, Absurdiel Vecht, which I also butchered, but have you seen the way his name is spelled? It's nonsense. And much like any good court, it is filled with courtly politics, which means backstabbing and spying everywhere. Ultimately, the fairies of old myth represented the primal fear of the unknown and the strangeness of the world in a time where so much of people's lives could only be explained by superstition. Much of our description of fairies seems to be so similar to aliens on purpose. For medieval villagers, the whole world was the unknown. For us, it's the vast stars above. But this sense of alien danger that fairies of old gave off is the basis of the way the Dark Eldar lore is designed and built, as well as their look. Their weapons are bizarre and cruel, their armor and ships are sleek and menacing, and oftentimes their beasts and horrors are the stuff of nightmares. If the Unseelie fairies were the nightmares made manifest of old times, then the Drukhari are the nightmares made manifest of the 41st millennium. And in both cases, in the fairy world and the world of evil space elves, nothing is more nightmarish than the Wild Hunt. The Wild Hunt is a mythological trope originating from Northern Europe. Usually, the Wild Hunt is a group of spectral warriors and their steeds, led by some sort of godlike figure. In Norse mythology, it was Odin himself that led the Wild Hunt. In others, it was Hecate, or Mab, Queen of the Fairies. Some myth even places King Arthur at the hunt's head. No matter who led it, Most myths depicted the Wild Hunt as a foul omen of dark winter nights. The hunt itself was a screaming horde that tore through the night on hellish steeds, accompanied by hunting dogs barking and howling in the darkness. The hunt usually came in and swept away or killed those in its path in an ecstatic battle frenzy. If you were unfortunate enough to be captured by the hunt, you would be taken back to their spectral realm to be never seen again. The Wild Hunt was a force of primal destruction, usually associated with foul omens and dark nights. Due to this association with foul, unexplainable omens, it's easy to see how some ancient myth had the Wild Hunt led by fairies of the Unseelie court, riding through the sky to capture unwitting humans to take back to their wicked fairy realm. Have you heard the sound of strange hooves and barking on a lonely winter night? It often meant the hunt had come for you. And like a rush of wind or a lightning strike, the fury and chaos of the hunt would disappear as quickly as it descended upon you, and you would be never seen again. So, if the Dark Eldar are the fair folk of myth in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, then their real space raids for humans to take back the Kamara are their Wild Hunt. And this analogy works extremely well. Just take a look at this passage from the 5th edition Dark Eldar Codex. Private Malko stared up in wonder as the eclipse manifested with stately grace above him. The disk of the red moon slid across the sun until its rays were no more than a fiery halo framing a dark void. Malko squinted, his brow furrowed as he spotted a point of jade light within. It seemed to split and grow outwards, opening like a mouth or a baleful eye. He fumbled for the comlink to report the strange vision to Commissar Radchek, but his voice caught in his throat. It looked for all the world like a sharp blade of a craft had burst out from the heart of the rift above, impossibly close, and was soaring straight for him. Another emerged, then another, then a dozen at once, screaming out of the skies like the poisoned darts of a hunter god. Malko stumbled backwards, remembering the stories Goodwife Ingrid used to tell him as a child. Grisly tales of a changeling folk who came from the skies to steal the innocent away into hell. "Man the guns!" Malko shouted, his voice hoarse with terror. "For the love of the holy, man the guns!" Not only is it notable for its excellently written depiction for a real space raid being like the Wild Hunts of old, it's also Phil Kelly looking at the reader in the eye and saying, yeah, this is all based on fairies. Fight me about it. But the chaos, the speed, the frenzy of a real space raid, with the alien technologies and tactics of a terrifyingly graceful and hateful group of warriors who make their assault at lightning speed, is the perfect analog for the Wild Hunt. It touches on a primal fear of being swept away in the night and disappearing without a rational explanation. You hear a weird noise walking home, and it's time to walk a little bit faster. The fact we can understand the fear and the absolute horror that must be a Wild Hunt in full motion from myth is why the terror of the real space raid from the Dark Eldar is so captivating to me. It's that very real fear of the dark, that uncanny feeling you're being watched that makes your hair stand up on end. It's something that we all have experienced before. Also, some interpretations of the Wild Hunt portray it as being a blessing from the gods, and those interpretations pretty much became the modern version of Santa Claus. So by association, the Drukhari are the most Christmassy of all of the factions of Warhammer 40,000. Yay! Phil Kelly and Jess Goodwin clearly had a vision when they designed the Dark Eldar. That vision was laid in with a lot of subtext from real-world myths of the fairy world and the dangers that they so often possessed, particularly the malevolent ones. Understanding this about their design made me really appreciate the place that the Dark Eldar provide in a larger setting of Warhammer 40,000. A setting that is already very busy with villains who are meant to strike fear. The Dark Eldar fear is a fairy tale fear. An old and ancient fear. All were endangered. Young and old were hunted down by that dark death shadow, who lurked and swooped in the long nights on the misty moors. Nobody knows where these reavers from hell roam on their foul errands. Hey, thanks again for watching this video. I thought it was going to be shorter than the last one, and it technically is shorter by about 5-6 minutes. I won't know until I'm done recording this little end bit, and that could add a lot of time. Like I said at the start, there was a big move in the process of getting this video made, and that combined with not doing a whole ton in August to get this video put together is kind of why this took so long, but I have ideas for a couple of new videos. Hopefully they don't take 2 months to do, and if you like this one, of course, please like, please subscribe, please tell your friends. The more people that watch these videos, the better it does for my brain chemicals. They shoot the good brain chemicals in there, and that makes me feel good. And let me see, I said like, share, subscribe. Oh, and hit that bell. Go follow me on social media. I'm at NerdNameDan on Twitter. I post there occasionally. It's mostly my models, which, by the way, my models are going to end up in videos forever. I love them. I love finding stupid reasons to put them in my stupid videos. It's pretty great. Yeah, that's about it. Hope to see you guys here pretty soon with very exciting, very new videos. Good night, everybody, and happy Halloween.